Hi, this is Dr. Maggie Perry with Tell Me What You're Proud Of. Today we have Ken Goodman on the show. He is an L.C.S.W. from UCLA that is in private practice in Los Angeles, specializing in anxiety and OCD. He is on the board of the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, and he has a book coming out called the Emetophobia Manual. Thanks so much, Ken, for being on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Great. So I know that you listened to the sessions I had with Danielle. Can you tell me what your impressions were?
Well, she has certainly had a traumatic adolescence from, I think you said, maybe 10 to 20, with her mom having different kinds of medical issues and seizures and just having to be on pins and needles waiting for the next thing to happen. She said something interesting when I was listening she said something about how she had nauseating fear. And I'm sort of wondering if she felt nauseous when she was experiencing all this anxiety while her mom was having seizures or whatever medical issues she was experiencing, because that is certainly tied in to what's going on now with her son every time he seems to get sick. And it seems as though anytime he gets sick, it just reactivates those traumas from when she was a child, when her mom was seriously ill. And, her son is having just normal child sicknesses, but it really triggers an exaggerated response for her, as well as a inability or a belief that she can't handle the situation when she really can. But I think a lot of times people with anxiety, they exaggerate risk and problems and they underestimate their abilities. She has the ability. As a child, she, I'm sure, lacked that ability and wasn't sure what to do. But it seems like now it's sort of everything's sort of reactivated with her son.
Well, can we talk a little bit about the relationship between trauma and OCD? Because she was saying in her history that she tried some different modalities of therapy that were more targeting the trauma of living with a parent with a chronic medical illness, and they didn't seem to be as effective. So even if conceptually we do see the connection between the trauma of having nauseating fear whenever her mother was sick and her now fear of the feeling of nausea or the potential of her child getting sick, how does that inform treatment if we conceptualize that as OCD?
Yeah, so it depends on how she experiences it currently. I don't know if she has intrusive memories of the past or not, or if she really doesn't think much about it. It's just more of a subconscious experience for her.
I'll ask.
But going forward, she has to do more exposures to help her get through it. But if she does have intrusive memories of the past, then that would have to be addressed. I don't know what kind of treatment she had before seeing you. Sometimes what I'll have my patients do who've had trauma in the past that's really manifesting itself in the present is I will have them write their trauma story down in the present in as much detail as they can and read it out loud many, many times, just over and over and over. And then I will have them
interrupt you.
Go ahead.
Why does it help to say it in the present?
Because you want to sort of activate those feelings again and then learn how to respond to them differently. Because as a child, she was in the moment. She didn't know what to do. It was extremely traumatic. As an adult, I want her to desensitize to that experience, and reading it out loud, which is very important, over and over will help desensitize. And then what I have patients do is I have them change the story. So the story kind of starts off the same, maybe with her mom having a seizure, and then she writes about her adult self entering the scene. And now it is a story made up, of course, between her child self and her adult self and her mom, with her adult self providing support, encouragement, reassurance, anything she wants to include in that story. And oftentimes just writing that story, that new ending, can be very therapeutic. And then reading that out loud several times.
That's great. Thank you for that suggestion. It sounds therapeutic.
Otherwise, I mean, if she's had intrusive memories, working with someone who does EMDR can be helpful as well. But if you don't have access to that type of therapist, this kind of intervention would work really well.
Okay. And if she doesn't have intrusive memories, then?
And if it's more, in the present tense with its, maybe related to the past, then it's more of a present issue where, her son gets sick, or her son might be sick, or she anticipates him getting sick, then I think what you were doing before when I listened to the session was really good, when you had her say that statement, I think it was "my son might die" or something like that. And she had to put it into a song. And people with anxiety are giving way too much power to their thoughts. And anytime someone has an anxiety disorder, there has to be some sort of exposure, like you're facing your fear. So if you have a fear of elevators, you eventually have to get on the elevator. You got to face your fear. But if the fear is death, well, you're not going to die. So what do you have to do? You have to expose yourself to the thought of death. So I thought that was a good intervention to help her see that her thoughts don't have power, and you could repeat these thoughts over and over and sort of desensitize to them. In addition to what you suggested, and
Before
then
we go, actually,
go ahead. Sorry.
Go on to the next thing. Yeah, just for the listeners, I want to explain that a little bit more. So at least the way I think about it is that she has thought action fusion. So having the thought, "my son might die," made her body feel as though it was occurring, that the threat was real. And so doing something like turning it into a song is personifying it, it's making it humorous, but it's also, like you're saying, is getting her used to having the thought and then living with the possibility that she'll have those sensations and she needs to cope with those sensations. I think oftentimes when people are thinking about doing an exposure, they're thinking, well, I better get like an 8 out of 10 in my anxiety, or I'm not doing my exposure right, and then I'm not going to get better. So with this kind of intervention in particular, although I feel this way towards all exposures, like you don't have to get anxious. So if she happens to start singing the song and think it's funny, that's still a great diffusion. Yeah, she doesn't have to get anxious to relate to those thoughts more effectively. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, is experience thoughts as thoughts and feelings as feelings rather than messages and threats.
That's right. That's very true. In addition to singing a song, another way to create some distance is sometimes I'll have my patients verbalize their fear with an accent, like an English accent, or it doesn't really matter, an Indian accent. And so when they say it in an accent, it really sort of feels like someone else's thought. And so it also creates some distance, and it can be kind of humorous for them as well. So what you're trying to do is take this thought that they have taken so seriously and make it like, whatever, it's just a thought. It's not that big of a deal. And so saying it with an accent is good as well.
I like that.
Now, if she doesn't, once she can say that phrase and doesn't create any anxiety, the next step up would be maybe writing a horror story about her worst fear. And her worst fear, from what I was hearing, was that she imagines her son getting sick, her son throwing up, she's not sure what to do, and she does the wrong thing, and then he dies. That's what I gathered. So she would write a story about that, where she does all the wrong things, and in the end, her son dies. And then she reads that story out loud in her voice several times, and then again in an accent. And she just keeps doing it until it's like, okay, this is ridiculous. This is just ridiculous. But when she first writes the story and she reads it out loud, it will probably elicit anxiety, maybe tears. It's not going to be pleasant. It's going to be very upsetting. But just keep doing it over and over. And eventually it's not that upsetting. It's like it just becomes a story. And that I think will help a lot with her fear that she's going to do the wrong thing, because she's really underestimating her ability. She seems like a very bright woman. And anytime, I mean, I'm a parent. I mean, anytime my child was sick, like, okay, well, do we take him to the doctor now? I don't know. Let's kind of see. I mean, everyone sort of struggles with that a little bit. But I think she's amplifying that fear.
Well, it seems like she's, and many people are people that, like, when they get into the situation, they're okay. So if he's actually sick, she's okay. It's more like the persistent uncertainty that can just drive her and other people to, like, worry all day. So do you have thoughts about, like, so even if she gets to a point where she's like, I'm not actually afraid if he's sick, because if he's sick, I'm going to handle it. If she can believe that, both in her mind and in her body, she may still, and I'll have to talk to her, but she may still persistently feel uncertain about what that will be like. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, she is every day dreading something, every day dreading that he's going to get sick, just like her experience with her mom. And with her mom's case, it happened on a frequent basis. With her son, doesn't happen as frequent, and it's not nearly as horrific, but she's still sort of waiting. It's almost like a time bomb. I don't know when it's going to happen. She knows it's going to happen. At some point, he's going to throw up. At some point, he's going to get sick, but she doesn't know. And so she's not wanting that to happen. Well, the more she remains in that defensive posture where, okay, I don't want this to happen, the more anxious she's going to be. So, if we look at adrenaline and fight or flight, your choice is either flee and escape. And I think she even mentioned that when I was listening. She talked about when she was going through this, she just wanted to leave. She just wanted to escape. She had fantasies of just leaving home. So as fight or flight, you're either in escape mode or fight mode. You're going to fight through it. And so it's either offense or defense. And she's just in a defense mode. And instead, every morning, what she can do is say, all right, let's go on offense. Bring it on. All right, come on. Come on, anxiety. Bring on something. Try to trick me. Try to, give my son some sort of symptom. Let's see. Now, she's not going to want to say that. But again, it's just a thought. And whether she says it or not has no bearing on if he's going to get sick. So most of the time when she says, all right, come on, give my son a tummy ache. Let's see what happens. I'm going to handle it. I can handle this. And then day after day, nothing will happen. But one day, something will happen and her son will get sick. And hopefully at that moment, she'll go, okay, now's my opportunity. Now it's showtime. Now I'm going to be ready. So instead of not wanting her son to be sick, like, okay, I need some practice. Come on, give him some sickness. Now, sounds silly because of course she doesn't want her son to get sick, but that thought has no bearing on whether he gets sick or not.
Mm-hmm. And so if she's afraid to be willing to like be on the offense and want that thought or want that to occur, then that would be another indication of thought action fusion that we could work on.
Right. So what anxiety likes to do is take your time away from you and scare you. And it does that in two ways. It does that by lying to you, by distorting, exaggerating, outright lie, and by engaging you, just engaging your attention. That's really how anxiety tricks us. And so if we understand what anxiety strategy is, to lie to you and to engage you, then we can have a counter strategy, which is, okay, I'm not going to believe the lie and I'm not going to engage. So the lie in her mind is that her son she's not going to be able to handle it and her son's going to die. I mean, he is going to get sick at some point, but the lie that she's experiencing is that she can't handle it and that he's going to die. And then she engages with that thought. And the more she engages with it, the more anxious she becomes. So it's like her counter strategy needs to be, all right, I'm not going to believe that. I have to refuse to believe that lie. And I have to refuse to engage in what am I going to do? Like, because I have a feeling that's kind of what she does. Okay, if you get sick, what am I going to do? I have to plan this out. I got to figure this out. That's engagement. It might seem like she's being productive. Sometimes productive, it seems like someone's being productive by planning, but actually all you're doing is engaging with anxiety. There's nothing to plan. There's nothing to, if you get sick, you'll figure out what to do in the moment. You don't have to plan for that.
What if she just can't stop thinking about it?
Well, I think the exposures that I'm talking about, where she writes a horror story, will be helpful for that. And reading that out loud and reading it out loud with an accent will help for that. Anxiety is a strong emotion with a powerful voice, and her voice needs to rise up in intensity and then be a little bit stronger. So if her voice is sort of meek, then it's going to be harder. So if anxiety asks her a question like, oh, what if your son gets sick today? Or what kind of a day is it going to be today? And then she needs to respond quickly and then turn away. So we're not trying to stop anxiety. We're not trying to stop that worry, because we can't. But what we're trying to do is not engage with it. So she might say, thanks for sharing, have a nice day, and then turn away and focus on something else. And then 5 minutes later, anxiety is going to ask another question. Thanks for sharing, have a nice day. And then you turn away. Or fake news, not going there, turn away. Or not taking the bait. And if she wants to be strong, she could say, not taking the bait, asshole, and then turn away. And it'll come back, but that's okay. But you're trying to rewire your brain to really not engage. Because like a fish in a lake, if you take that bait, you're caught. And once you go down, once you take that bait, once you engage with that thought, now you're going to get really anxious. And now you're going down that rabbit hole. So I think she has to retrain her brain to not engage, including not plan what to do. And in fact, go on offense. Come on. Yeah, I want him to get sick. Of course, she knows she doesn't want him to get sick, but say it like, come on, I need some practice. So next time he's sick, I can then practice not reacting in the same way I normally react. So let's go, bring it on. And have that sort of bring it on mindset instead of, no, I don't want that.
Okay, all of that makes sense. I think she's going to ask, and other people may be interested. It seems like we're talking about primarily uncertainty and her son being sick, and it happens to be about throwing up, but it could be basically about any other illness. So how does what she experienced compare to emetophobia, like actually fearing vomiting, as I understand it?
So sometimes people when someone has a fear of vomiting, it doesn't necessarily mean they have a fear that they're going to die from it. Most people don't, but some people do. I remember I'm working with a patient right now who developed emetophobia because as a child, his mom had cancer, and she was going through chemo, and she was doing a lot of throwing up. And then a couple years later, she died. And so he associates throwing up with death. So for him, he does think of death, and other people do too. But oftentimes people with emetophobia don't think about death. They just think it's disgusting, it's horrific, and they associate. Oftentimes there's an association with panic. So not only are they experiencing nausea but they're they're feeling extremely anxious. So the average person, when they feel nauseous, they don't want to feel nauseous and they don't want to throw up, but they don't tend to be anxious. But anytime someone with emetophobia feels nauseous, or they have loose stools, or they have some sort of physical symptom, anxiety is right there with it. And so there then becomes a pattern of safety behaviors and avoidance where they stop eating. And then because if there's nothing in their body, there's nothing to throw up. So they'll stop eating. And then they get hunger pains. And the hunger pains then are misinterpreted as, oh no, I'm going to throw up. I'm feeling something in my stomach. And then they further don't eat, which, compounds the problem. So, yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, it's okay. Yeah, so I can see that that's kind of a different fear altogether than what Danielle's experiencing.
Yeah, because for Danielle, it might not just be him throwing up. It might be any sort of sickness that he has, but it could be both. I mean, you could have the emetophobia as well as the fear of him dying. I mean, absolutely.
And so if someone maybe doesn't stop eating because of fear of vomiting, but just in general is worried about that all the time, do you actually suggest that they, for instance, try to get themselves to throw up or eat something that they know is going to make them nauseous? Like, what kind of exposures would somebody with the fear of vomiting do?
Yeah, good question. So I do not recommend they stick their finger down their throat or drink Ipecac or anything like that. You don't have to overcome emetophobia by doing that. I think it can be dangerous, and it's not something that I recommend. But there's plenty of other exposures that you can do, and you need to do all the other ones. And those exposures really depend on where your fear lies. And it could be as simple as, for some people, just saying the word vomit will cause anxiety. So for them, they just need to start saying words like vomit and barf and puke and all these things out loud in their home, away from their home, while they're eating. There's a ton of exposures. And everything, if you have more of a fear of germs and food poisoning, it would be maybe eat something one day after the expiration date. But again, for someone with emetophobia, that may just be too much. So in that case, they're going to start off maybe by eating one bite of something the day before the expiration date. I've had patients who have a fear of food not being digested. And so after they eat, they won't leave their house for 2 hours until their food is digested. So working with a woman right now who will not drive after she eats for a couple hours. And so I said, well, why don't you just, eat a meal and then drive a block? But that was too intense for her. So literally it was taking one bite and then sitting in her car. That was it. That was enough just to start with. And then having one bite and driving 10 feet. and then now she's at a point where she can eat a meal and drive, I think, like in her neighborhood. So she's getting a lot better with that.
One thing I just want to comment on while you're saying that is that the exposures are process driven, not outcome driven. So in that case, the reason that we want, it's great to do the smallest next step is because you want to meet your anxiety where it is and do whatever your body can tolerate in terms of getting anxiety going and then showing yourself you can handle it. So you wouldn't want to do the scariest thing you can think of, and which can potentially be traumatic to you. You want to do the next step and then get good at that and then move forward to the next hardest step.
Right. You don't want to do anything too difficult because that could trigger panic and be regressive. So I always tell people to start off creating some anxiety to practice responding differently to it. It's not just doing the exposure, it's doing it correctly. So in the Emetophobia Manual, I talk a lot about how to do exposures correctly with the correct mindset. So you can practice responding differently when you do feel anxious. Yeah, so you want to have an offensive mindset, and the whole idea is to practice responding in a different way. So, for instance, one of the exposures that I'll have people do is make, and again, we're starting out small, is making vomiting noises, the sound of vomit. And then spitting into a sink, just putting water in your mouth and just spitting. And then putting water in your mouth and then spitting into the sink, making noises, increasing the realism of those noises. And then moving on to other liquids and moving on to the toilet and things like that. But when people do these, people are terrified to do these exposures. If you have emetophobia, it's pretty terrifying to do it. So you want to do it in the right way, which is sort of a bring it on mindset. And I talk a lot about this in the book, to want what you don't want. Like, all right, bring it on, bring on the nausea, I can handle it. And what people find is when they do that, there's a lot of anticipatory anxiety, but in the end, they're like, oh, well, that wasn't so bad. Actually feels pretty good. Like they find that it feels more empowering, and when they do it the correct way. And the patients that I work with who have emetophobia find that doing those kinds of exposures are extremely helpful, and that they really just stop fearing it. So they don't have to stick their finger down their throat. They just have to pretend to puke.
Okay. And then what about if somebody has sensitivity to gagging and kind of is afraid of anything that might make them feel disgusted because they might gag?
So they're not afraid to throw up. They might gag.
Yeah.
And then do they gag? So if they gag, so if they do gag, yeah. Usually when people have that, they don't want to gag. And unlike someone with emetophobia who does not throw up, typically people with emetophobia never throw up. They can go 10 years without throwing up, but they still fear it every single day. But people with a fear of gagging often do gag. Like that's one of the symptoms of anxiety is it triggers a reflexive reaction to gag. Whereas someone with emetophobia, they feel nauseous, but they don't throw up. So with the gagging, you have to, it's very hard, but you have to stop trying to control it, and you actually have to be okay with gagging. So much so that you have to sort of accept it to the point where, all right, if I gag, I gag. So by reducing the fear of gagging, you're going to actually reduce the likelihood that you're going to gag, because it's sort of self-perpetuating where you fear gagging so much that you end up gagging. But if you stop caring about gagging, then you're going to gag a lot less. It'll just be, you still might, but the frequency will be a lot less. But when you try to stop the gagging or become afraid of it, then it's just going to happen all the time. So you purposely gag, like just, you're going to go places where you might gag and say, all right, if I gag, I gag. And you see, and then you're going to work with the therapist who specializes in anxiety to see where to go from there. But it's very similar to other symptoms of anxiety, like racing heart or blushing or lightheadedness. You can't stop that. So instead you have to accept it. You just have to accept that those symptoms are going to exist and learn not to be afraid of those symptoms and to let them happen.
That is really
and really get to the root of it, because usually the people who have a fear of lightheadedness are a fear of passing out. People who get nauseous are a fear of vomiting. the fear of gagging. I don't know. I guess you have to find out. Is it a fear that they're going to die? Is it a fear of embarrassment?
What I'm
what is it?
thinking of is in the context of social anxiety. Yeah.
Yeah, that they're going to be very embarrassed. Yeah, it's very, very difficult to do that. I did work with someone who had that, and he actually gagged, and he finally sought out treatment because he was doing law school interviews and he couldn't go to these interviews. Oh, and he would use safety behaviors. He would eat things to prevent the gagging, but he can't eat in the middle of an interview for law school. So he had to be okay with gagging.
Yeah, so just to comment on that, safety behaviors are things that people do to try to prevent themselves from feeling anxious. And so when you're thinking about what kind of exposures you'd want to be doing, you're also looking for in what ways are you doing safety behaviors and refraining from doing the things that typically prevent you from feeling anxious, because they're going to then make you feel anxious, but then you're going to practice tolerating that uncertainty and that anxiety.
Right. So it's leaving the house without the mints or whatever you take with you to prevent yourself from gagging. Or oftentimes people with emetophobia will take water with them, or there's a lot of things they might take with them. So it's learning how to go out without those. And again, you're doing it in small steps.
Yeah, all of that makes sense. Was there anything else any other impressions that you were hoping to talk about?
No, I think we covered a lot of it. She just has to maybe come up with a mantra and sort of get it into her head. Maybe for her, it would be something like, I will not exaggerate risk and I will not underestimate my abilities. And just say it all day long. So it gets in her head. So put it as a reminder on her phone, because she's just underestimating her abilities. I mean, that's not the only problem, but that's a piece of the puzzle. Because when it comes down to it, when her son has a problem, she'll be able to deal with it.
That sounds great. I totally agree. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you.